Good evening, everyone. My name is Kim Farrant, and I'd like to welcome you all to What Men Really Think About. What Men Really Think About is an ongoing series of public forums dedicated to unveiling issues that many men don't talk about, and especially not in public. As your host and co-founder of the forums, I'm very intrigued by tonight's topic. So, what men really think about masculinity. And notions of masculinity we find everywhere. We find them on our billboards, on our television screens, on our movie screens, on our sporting fields, religious icons. And I'm interested in what that brings up for men, the notion of what it is to be masculine. What's the definition of that? Where do we get it from? How does that make us feel? Do we live up to that? So that's what we're here to unravel this evening, and we have three amazing men to do that with us. With no further ado, I'll introduce you. Our first guest is Mark Bolton. So Mark is a retired AFL football player who enjoyed a 10-year career at the Essendon Football Club. He was the first recipient of the Ron Evans Community Leadership Award and is a director of the Bill Hutchinson Foundation. He's got a strong involvement in community projects. Mark has been the driving force behind the development of Ladder. So Ladder is an independent non-profit organisation which was established in 2007 by Mark and Joel Bowden and
Paula Curia was involved.
Yep, and so he is now the CEO. Ladder, with the backing of the AFL and also players, helps to help young people break the cycle of homelessness and hopefully build pathways towards independence. They're doing a beautiful job of making this happen. Mark has several degrees. He studied at Harvard. He also is a member of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Homelessness in Victoria and is a director of the Foyer Foundation. Mark lives with his wife, Alex. Please welcome Mark Bolton. So our next guest is one of Australia's most versatile and accomplished actors, Steve Bastoni. Steve is also a local Peninsula man, so we welcome that. Steve has a string of film and television credits behind him, including the Golden Globe nominated On the Beach. He became a household name many years ago with a character called Angel on Police Rescue, you may know it, and he also starred in numerous TV productions including Neighbours, Wildside, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Underbelly, The Golden Mile, Sea Patrol and Rush, and many more. His film credits include The Heartbreak Kid, which I remember loving that film, 15 or More, He Died with a Falafel in His Hand, South Pacific, Matrix Reloaded, Suburban Mayhem, Crocodile Hunter, Macbeth, and the list goes on. This year, Steve is starring opposite Sam Worthington in the highly anticipated surf drama Drift. He's also this year continuing to run the Peninsula Short Film Festival and Acting School, of which he is the founder and director. He is an Australian ambassador for Lifeline, which is wonderful, and he is married with 3 young children. Please welcome Steve Bastoni. And our third guest is bushtracker and psychotherapist Lee True. After training as a psychotherapist, Lee studied primitive survival skills and then spent a year living in the bush, living off the land, finding food, shelter. Amazing. I'm dumbfounded at his ability to do that. He now runs Blue Gum Bushcraft, which helps kids and adults to be more at home in wild nature. So they use the skills of our shared hunter-gatherer ancestry, as Lee talks about, as tools for awareness and self-transformation. He also facilitates rites of passages through the Pathways Foundation and is about to begin training the New South Wales Department of Sport and Recreation to deliver these programs for their fathers and their boys, which is just beautiful work that's happening out there. Rites of passages, mentoring kids. Lee was also the bushcraft and trapping consultant for the Australian film The Hunter with Willem Dafoe. He is married and has a beautiful young daughter. Welcome, Lee True.
Thank you. Thank you.
So tonight, like with every forum, I've asked the men to write a personal story specifically for this forum, for this topic on what men really think about masculinity. So we'll now hear Mark's story.
Beauty. Look, it was 6:30 last Wednesday. I met a group of mates at a coffee shop in Fitzroy. I asked the group if they could define masculinity for me. I wanted to sort of outsource my task. By the time the waiter with the big beard, long hair, skinny chinos and no shoes had taken our order to the barista, the guys had rattled off their definition. Big, hairy, silent, robust, caveman, stubborn, unemotional, decisive, ruthless, old-school leader, you know, your old man's mate that just told you, just get in the car. After they were done, I asked them, look, by that definition, would you describe me as masculine? The very short and unanimous answer they gave me was no. A little bit too short, but it caused me to actually look at my upbringing, which I contend is sort of still going, and look at how masculinity was being modelled over my life. I grew up in Ringwood, very much the youngest of 5 children. My nickname growing up was Oops, as mum and dad had a bit of an 11-year kind of hiatus between children 4 and 5. Best mistake they ever made, they assure me. As you can imagine, the family dynamic was fairly different, and for me it was like growing up as an only child with 6 parents. I can't really remember a time where we're all under the same roof at the same time, as I think by the time I was 5, the eldest 3 had moved out. I really remember Dad being the breadwinner, you know, the strong and silent type, a rare mix of, you know, practical know-how and creative intellect. He literally built our house with his bare hands, but also not a day went by without me being asked that a word that meant something was A something, L something, SI something N, as he tried to finish the age cryptic crossword for the day. Dad was also very community-minded. Every Saturday night we were bundled off to church in the car, and going to church on a Saturday night meant that it would free us up for Dad's and my other religion, which was football. My brothers were both very talented footballers. I spent more time watching them playing the VFA than I did watching AFL or VFL football as it was in the day. On reflection though, and this is sort of where we got to, you know, with this task, but I was surrounded by very strong women, in particular my mother. Mum was Dad's labourer as he built the house. My sisters were also incredibly strong women, and I think I saw just as many games of netball growing up as I did football. Probably, you know, enjoyed those more as I got older. My family was made up of really sturdy characters where, male or female, you're expected to excel at school, backyard cricket, or in a kitchen, you know, tea towel fight. And I guess it was that strength of character that was modelled for me growing up more than masculinity. Growing up in the shadow of my brothers, I always aspired to play football. From March to September, I seemed to have a footy card in my hand at all times. That continued into my teens, where I started to take footy a bit more seriously, but it seemed that footy was taking me a bit more seriously, and in 1997 I was drafted to play for Essendon. How do you summarise what it's like to be in an AFL environment for 10 years? I can safely say it was the easiest and the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. It's easy in that you're living a life where you're well paid to keep fit, playing the sport you love. Hard, and it was just bloody hard work. Like physically and emotionally, you're taken to the brink all but 8 weeks of the year. You're just constantly in elite competition, and for me that was as much about staying in the team, staying on the list, let alone how you perform on match day. Competition in an AFL environment is just a way of life. Who's running the quickest, lifting the most, being the most courageous on field, being the most selfless, and I do understand the irony there, and ultimately performing the best on match day out in front of tens of thousands of people who will sit, you know, in support of you, but also sit in judgment of your each and every move. Competition was no less subtle off-field. Performance off-field was just as competitive and as measurable. Whether it was in pubs, nightclubs or footy trips, you're always on the clock. The stories in the change room on a Monday morning were just as important to the esteem you're held in as to what happened on a Saturday afternoon. Now, with a bit of space and a bit of clarity, I kind of see masculinity as less defined as I once did. I think it comes down to 2 things for me, and that's context and competition. Context in the environment that you're in and the community that you're in defines on what masculinity is. And once that, you know, that's defined, masculinity is about how well you compete against your peers against that norm. Back to the coffee shop, as the waiter, who was clearly in competition with the barista about who could be the most hipster, brought our coffees out. And I asked to follow up the question with the guys I was with and said, look, on the definition of masculinity that you've just given me, how many of you actually aspire to be like that? And unanimously the answer was none. So I think masculinity's changed.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Wonderful.
Right.
So, in saying that for you, masculinity is defined by two things, context and competition. So, of the context of the community that you were in, the AFL, which we've had some AFL players on the forums before, and I remember Joel Bolton talking a lot about how it's a very kind of alpha male vibe happening there. How did you compare with the codes of masculinity within the AFL?
Look, it's, as I said, it's a highly charged atmosphere all the time. So I was literally driving out here past Chadstone, and there was a mixed martial arts studio which we would go and train at on a Wednesday morning. And you'd literally go there and there's sort of crash mats all around, and you'd fight for an hour. And it was really, it was this really, I guess, primal thing where you're kind of out there, and you used to do this thing called shark bait. And there was a little circle on the ground and the bigger circle around that. It's kind of like a sumo ring, I guess. And you would stay in there until someone knocked you out. And it was just this amazing thing. There's this guys queuing up to actually overpower you.
Wow.
And it's just, so that's what you do at training. And then you sort of take that out to a field where you've got, as I said, tens of thousands of people watching, and it is essentially your masculinity gets compared to everyone else's, in front of a lot of different people. And it's an amazing environment to be in. If you played a good game, it's the best thing in the world. But if you played a bad game, it's an amazing to feel lonely in amongst 90,000 people within 100 metres of you. It's just, it's a bizarre place to sort of grow up and learn about what being a man is, I guess.
So did the AFL definition of masculinity in terms of your ability to compete and to win and to be the last one standing in the middle of the shark bait, did that define you for a time?
Oh, it did, definitely. I mean, you kind of have to buy into that, to survive. That's, and plenty of guys that, I guess, don't buy into that regime, that discipline, but also that mindset. You don't last. And I think the average lifespan of an AFL player is about 3 or 4 years. And, the guy, you just get weeded out if you don't buy into that. And look, you don't have to agree with it, but it's something that you just you've thrown in amongst, and you've got to compete to stay there if you want to stay there.
So when you say, for instance, if you have a bad game and you're feeling lonely, or you're feeling self-doubt, or whatever the demons are that you go to, how did you deal with those feelings at the time?
Oh, look, it was actually funny. That's sort of the intersection, I guess, of the work I do now and the work I was doing then. I got involved in the community, and it was just one case in point. So 2001, Essendon was coming off the premiership the year before, and incredibly successful year. I didn't take part. I was at the club, but I didn't take part in that premiership. And to be in an AFL environment with a premiership, it's just that's why you're there. That's why you play from when you're that big, is to play in that day, and you missed out on that. And that was something in itself to deal with. But the next year, 2001, Essendon had a hugely successful year again, and I'd played a handful of games that year towards the end of the year, and I think we played Richmond in the last round of the season. I played on I think it was Brad Otten's. Did okay. Brad still kicked 5 goals on me. So, not the time of year where you, as a defender, you want to have to be pantsed by the bloke you're playing on. I didn't play the first final, and Matthew Lloyd managed to get himself reported and got a week. Then I came back into the team. So for the preliminary final against Hawthorn, so you've literally got 90,000 people there, and it was just an amazing day, amazing experience for me. And we got through. We won. Played a small part within that win, but came to that week, and you're at grand final week. All of a sudden, I'm in the team, going into that grand final week, and it's for those that do support AFL football, and particularly Melbourne-based teams, I encourage you just to get involved in grand final week, because it's the best week going around. If you are involved. But got to the Thursday and trained, got through, and the weather's always great in September, and you're sort of feeling good about it. And sure enough, it came to the moment that I was dreading, which was when they read the team out for the grand final. And sure enough, I generally waited till the end because I was usually on the bench or an emergency for a large majority of my career. But hearing that name, and obviously I wasn't going to hold Lordy out of a position. He's did win the Coleman medal that year, so didn't have too many high hopes at that. But sure enough, I was left out of the team. And there, you're surrounded by people sort of, patting you on the back saying bad luck, and but you are in the lowest place of all time. Something you've dreamed about since you were a kid, and you miss out by that much. It's hard enough for an AFL club to get to that point, let alone missing that. So walked out of the change rooms, fair to say I was kicking stones around, but a reminder went off on my phone. And I had forgotten in my own sort of self-absorption that I had been involved with a community program, for the last 8 weeks of that year, and I was actually working at Melbourne Juvenile Justice Centre, and the alarm went off to say it was actually it was like the finale of that program. So there is not one place I would prefer least to go right now is to go to the Juvenile Justice Centre, check your phone, check your keys in at the door, and go and play nice with these kids, who were an amazing bunch of guys. Some of them there for some pretty serious crimes, but they did respond to us, and we talked about goal setting and all that sort of things. But we had to modify the program because the goals that they were setting were a bit different to something you'd find appropriate. But the last day of the year, I was umpiring this footy match between this group of inmates. And we rock up there, and the footy field was about as big as this room. And there was goalposts at the other end. Fair to say the ball was sort of kept fairly low, because if the ball went over the fence...
Game's over.
Game's over. There was a few blokes who put their hands up to go and get it, but weren't really that comfortable that they were going to come back. But seeing these guys run around, having a time of their lives in Melbourne Juvenile Justice Centre, all were going to be there for the foreseeable future, and looking at where they were in their lives at that point, I was sort of thinking, oh, look, we'll probably get over this disappointment I had from a footy perspective. And that kind of, I guess, drove me further to sort of say, well, that was my outlet, was getting involved in community activities to sort of think that the world is a lot bigger than football. And, that's the thing, you kind of get sucked into that sort of football mentality, that's all there is. So for me, it was that outlet, it was just getting out. Whether that was study or work in the community, I just had to get out of that environment and be in a place that just wasn't that football club. That's how I coped.
So it sounds like there's a whole identification of, if we win, I'm worthy, I'm good. If we lose or I don't get picked for the team, I'm no
Absolutely,
good.
And you are tied to that.
So you're putting your focus on gratitude for, there's a bigger world out there, and I'm grateful that I'm just not in prison and I have a life and I have my freedom and I can help in some way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. So now you're working with kids at Ladder, and you have 23 kids in the organisation?
35 across 2 states, yeah. So we're in Melbourne and Adelaide. So we've got 12 young people in Collingwood and 23 in Adelaide.
Right. So a lot of these kids are homeless. They're not necessarily having direct contact with their parents. So I'm imagining that in a way you kind of take a role of a role modelling a male figure, a father figure potentially. Or what are you trying or consciously role modelling in terms of masculinity to these young kids?
Look, it's really interesting. I think you're right. What we do isn't rocket science. We try and, these young people have come from, very, very different backgrounds, be that some that are from refugee backgrounds, but some from middle-class families in Melbourne, so there's no, these kids are coming from a lot of different environments, and masculinity has been modelled to them entirely differently, from where they're from. So we talk about a lot about culture and about norms, and in the programs that we work in, because we work with males and females, so it's we work very much to set a supportive and aspirational culture within the sites that we work in. So the work that we do involves partnerships with other organisations, which means the young people we work with are actually accommodated for 2 years and supported, and there's obviously learning opportunities and education, employment, training outcomes that we try and get. But these young people are living together, and we try and set up a really supportive culture, and basically it's just handing it over to them. And so we're saying, well, you guys own the culture here. It's not us telling you how you should be. So for us, it's about facilitating that and sort of saying, well, what are the aspects of community more broadly, whether that's masculinity, femininity, or how you treat your neighbour, literally, and how that sort of is going to support you on your own journey out of homelessness. Because that's the only thing that they've got in common, is the fact that they've come up against the issue of homelessness.
So, but if I bring it back to you specifically, yes. So you as a man working and interacting with these kids, sometimes more than others in terms of how much admin you have to do on a daily level, what do you find in yourself that you are giving to them or demonstrating to them about masculinity, about whatever that word means to you, about being a man? Like what? So for instance, if you had your own kids, what do you want them to take away that masculinity is or can be? And so I'm thinking in your work environment, you'd be displaying that.
I think it's around the strength of character. You know, just being really clear on what you believe in, whether that's social justice or whatever that is, or your own sense of self, and actually being like really disciplined to stick to that and not changing that. I think that's the one thing. I think it's a sort of that sense of self, that you understand yourself and actually understand your place within the world. And whether that's just understanding the context that you're in and all those sort of things and what's required of you as a man at that time, and making sure that you have your own sort of set of ethics that you don't change. And like we tend not to talk about morals, you talk more about ethics, which is kind of that process of arriving at what you think about the world, and making sure that you, as I said, really comfortable with yourself and really you stick by that.
So it's kind of, in a way, what I'm hearing is when you were an AFL player, you understood the world that you were in, and that's how it has to be if I'm going to survive in this world. But I'm not necessarily like that in here.
You don't change who you are.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Good. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Very inspiring. Thank you. Steve, would you like to read us your story?
Sure. I can't speak of masculinity without mentioning my father. My father was an Olympian. He competed in the 1952 Helsinki Games and was 5 times Italian champion. He was king of the Tiber. I grew up in Rome, and I remember weekends we'd go down to his rowing club by the banks of the Tiber, and he would work out and I would watch in astonishment as he would bench press seemingly immovable objects. One morning I was informed that we were moving to Australia, and the next thing I knew we were on a plane, minus Dad. I was 8. On the plane, Mum told me stories of Australia, that there was cowboys there, and I could have my own horse. Taking my cue from Westerns, I fantasised about shootouts in saloons and riding a horse along the plains. When we arrived at Tullamarine, I was in shock. This wasn't what we had discussed. Maybe this was where my mistrust of women was born. I was left to discover how to become a man on my own. Carlton in the 70s. My sisters drew a lot of attention from the young guys in the neighbourhood, and so my male role models were gangsters and petty crims. Most of them had been to Tirana and were on the way to Pentridge. Heaps of tats and testosterone. One of these blokes, Cos, was like a god to me. He had a fearsome reputation as a fighter and could roll an 8-paper joint blindfolded. He would sit me up on the breakfast bar and punch my eyes gently and tell me that he was toughening them up. I looked up to him like a father. So at 11, Cos and the boys taught me how to do jail tats, and I began to inscribe my legs with mindless designs in an effort to be tough like them. Fast forward 30 years and I found myself in a private club in King's Cross, drinking alone at the bar in my black leather jacket, a gram of coke in my pocket. I'd found paradise. I'd just finished Matrix 2. I had money, prestige and more women than I could count. The fear of my sensitivity being uncovered had led me to create a mask of aggression, and I could follow it up with my fists. The cocaine allowed me to drink twice as much as a normal guy and have given me the confidence to pick up women. Although I discovered that I liked cocaine more than women, so after snorting a few bags, I couldn't get it up anymore. Cue Viagra. Hallelujah. Now I was a complete package. I had something to go up, something to go down, something to go round and round. I had complete control of the situation, so I thought. Some nights I would bring a girl home, sleep with her, and then go out and get another one. Bring her home and sleep with her, but I couldn't wait for her to leave the minute I'd come. After she left, I was so desperately lonely I would call a prostitute. I couldn't bear to be alone, but I couldn't stand being around people. My fear of intimacy and low self-esteem had limited my ability to have meaningful relationships. I used to cheat on every girlfriend I had because I was sure they would do it to me. I didn't realise I was cultivating a deep sense of shame and guilt, and the only person I was cheating was myself. How can a man love himself when he knows he's a liar and a cheat? I was terrified that if people knew the real me, surely they would hate me. I developed a serious addiction to cocaine, sex and gambling in an effort to lose myself, to silence this relentless voice in my head that told me, "You're shit, you're not a man." But after a few years, nothing worked, and I was left with myself. Wherever you go, there you are. After getting treatment for my addictions and taking an honest look at myself, I realised that I'm okay the way I am. For many years, I believed the lies that I'd been fed, that I needed a better car, more money, a hotter woman to be a real man. I didn't find happiness in any of that stuff. In fact, it brought me to the verge of suicide. What is it to be a successful man? What is masculinity? I don't think it has anything to do with money or status. I think it's the ability to accept oneself, strengths and weaknesses, good and bad. These days I value kindness over toughness, being fair over being right. Today I strive to be a gentle man. I have a wife and 3 beautiful children who are teaching me how to be a man that I can love and respect. My father's shoes were impossible to fill, but these days I'm comfortable in my own.
I'm all moved. Thank you, Steve. That's really amazing. So you ended that talking about your dad and his shoes being impossible to fill. An Olympiad would be difficult. How did you feel, or do you remember how you felt as a young boy having that absence from your father for such a long time?
Well, I never sort of thought of it to be permanent, and he was always in my life. Like, he would come out to Australia every holidays and spend 2 months of Christmas holidays with us. But I found that to be actually more difficult than him being completely absent, because being absent, I was my own God. I was my own authority. You know, I could do what I want, and I exercised that freedom from a very early age. Oh, you know, I went to school stoned on dope when I was 11. You know, I was out in the street till 2 a.m. when I was 13. So when he would come into my life and exercise the father figure with the authority, and it just didn't wash with me, because my attitude was, well, who are you? Where have you been to bring me these rules and regulations that you want me to live by, yet you're not a constant presence in my life? And so it was difficult, and we clashed a lot because of that. You know, in our conversations, we'd speak regularly on the phone, but our conversations was, you know, he'd say, "How are you?" And I'd say, "Great." And he'd say, "What's 7 per 8? What's 7 times 8? And I would ask Mum, "What's 7 times 8? And she'd tell me the answer, and then I'd, you know...
56.
Yeah, just tell him down the phone, you know. And that was the extent of our communication, pretty much. And it was hard, you know, not having a dad, because, you know, I was a pretty wild kid. and I needed a firm hand, and my mum was of the school of thought. I think she was from the Dr. Spock school of... Dr. Spock was a psychologist in the 70s whose theory on raising children was you just let them, well, according to my mum, was just let them do what the fuck they want. So, yeah.
So what did you need from your dad?
Well, I think looking at it now, at the time I didn't know what I needed. I thought I was fine, you know. Looking back, I think I needed guidance, and I needed a role model, a positive role model that I could, you know someone who could teach me right from wrong, and teach me boundaries, and teach me self-respect and self-restraint. And, you know, there was no rules in my upbringing, and so, you know, anything went. And so I had no kind of moral compass. And, you know, there was no problem in going out and stealing cars or going out to nightclubs at 13. I was, you know, sneaking into nightclubs at 13 and 12, 13 and drinking and working in an inflation downstairs bar when I was 16. So it was a kind of a lawless upbringing. And I think kids, particularly young men, at a certain age need boundaries. You know, I craved someone to go, "No, you can't do this." You know, and I would push against my mother to try and get that thing, and, you know, it didn't happen, you know. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as a result, I gravitated towards, you know, the gangsters and the strong men in my community, and the strong men in my community were criminals, and, you know, guys who could punch hard, and you know, guys with fearsome reputations. They were the guys to look up to in my community.
Well, I suppose there was some boundaries there when you've got some guy punching his fist into your eyes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well,
I'm not saying that that's a healthy boundary, but
yeah.
like
I mean, look, that Cos was
them.
In his way. That he believed that was toughening me up, and that's what I needed. You know, it was child abuse, but he, you know, he did teach me how to fight, and that's something that that got me through, you know, a lot of difficult times, I suppose, is that knowledge that, I mean, I could defend myself and I could stand up for myself. But it's interesting you say that. I mean, there's an insecurity about that, not knowing, you know, not having a father just in the house. That presence of having a father in the house gives you a certain kind of security, you know, and that's something I think I missed out on growing up, but certainly. And I remember there was one kid. I was walking home from school. There was a kid, one of the bigger kids, and he was in grade 6, and I was like grade 2 or 3 or something. And he used to give us a clip across the ear every now and then, and we'd mouth off at him. And my dad I was walking about 50 metres in front of my dad. He was out here on holiday, and I mouthed off to this guy, and he chased me. And next minute, my dad had him up against the fence by the throat, going, and he went white because my father was a powerful guy. And I remember feeling extremely proud and happy about that. You know, it was like my dad's home. You know.
I remember when I met you, and you very openly, beautifully told me your story and how, you know, back in the day, because I actually met you 20 years ago on a film set, which I reminded you of, and you said, which woman was I with, or something like that, and there was an implication of, back in the day I was a different man, and you spoke about how, you know, fighting and taking drugs and being with different women and all of this stuff was like all of the veneer. And in your story, you've mentioned your fear of sensitivity, of your sensitivity, so you had the mask of aggression. So I'm wondering if you could talk about what was underneath the fists and all of that aggression, and what's
fear.
The sensitivity? Okay,
yeah, fear. Yeah. You know, I grew up with very strong women also, you know, in my life. My mum was a very strong woman, and I'd hear her talk about politics and stuff. She was an intellectual, and she often spoke about Germaine Greer and feminism. And so I grew up a young guy who had feminist ideology who was trying to get laid. And that didn't really work too well because, you know, you'd be at a party and you're 14, 15 talking about feminism, and the girls would go, oh yeah, that's very interesting that he knows about Germaine Greer, very interesting. And then they'd go home with the nearest, you know, Neanderthal they could find because that's just how things work. So I was you know, I really didn't know who I was, and I was taking drugs from a pretty early age, which sort of disconnected me from any kind of, I don't know, emotional growth.
So fear of what? I'm not quite
sure.
Just
I understand.
fear.
I was scared that you know, I might be taken advantage of, in the sense that fear of, you know, if I was perceived to be weak, I might get picked on. I was scared of living. I was scared of, I didn't know how to communicate with women really well. I was scared about that, so there was a lot of anxiety around that. So drugs and booze took away that anxiety, which was great. I didn't feel part of any social group, although I did play, you know, junior footy, and I was quite successful in junior footy and basketball as well. I played state basketball in under 16, so I was in that context I felt secure. But out in the world, I didn't feel a part of. You know, I was different. You know, I felt different. Although I was the only kid in primary school with long hair and, you know, marijuana on his breath, but. So I guess I was different in some ways, but I mean the difference was more pronounced in my head, I think, than anyone else's, and that feeling of aloneness, I guess, was accompanied by fear, because I think that we're social animals and we need to feel a part of, and when you don't feel a part of, you know, quite rightfully, I think you feel fearful, because that's a primal instinct to a situation where. You know, we haven't evolved, our emotional brains haven't evolved since, you know, the dinosaurs, you know, in the sense that fear, fight and flight and those kind of responses haven't evolved. And sometimes they manifest themselves in ways that aren't, you know, like in those days, you know, if you were in the caveman sort of days, then being thrown out of the tribe meant certain death, because you'd be out in the cold, you'd get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, you know. But now that's not the case, you know. You can survive, but we still have that primal response, I think, that fear, you know, that, oh my God, I'm on my own, I'm not part of the herd, you know, that security is missing. So, yeah, I was an anxious kid, you know. I wet the bed till I was about 11, you know, I was pretty anxious. So I built this exterior that I'm tough and I'm, impervious to any taunts and impenetrable, and emotionally you can't fuck with me, and if you try, I'll punch your face in. And I could, you know, and that was my kind of defence mechanism against anyone getting close to me and finding out that in fact I was pretty scared. You know?
Does that make you lonely?
Yeah, I was terribly lonely, yeah. Because nobody knew the real me, and that carried on, you know, through until quite recently, until I got rid of all my addictions. You know, because that mask of aggression kept me safe from attack, but it also kept me distanced from any intimacy. You know, it kept me, you know, you build this mask around you that keeps the world out, but it also keeps love out, and it keeps you out. So, you know, that isolation just further compounds your own insecurity and further, you know, feeling of separateness. And so drugs were a good option for me because, you know, through drugs I like to be alone. Well, you know, for a while there I had a great, huge social circle, and, you know, I was hanging around with a lot of people, and they were all great friends. And, you know, when I was riding high, but then eventually I became so anxious because, you know, the booze and drugs, and I consider booze and drugs to be the same thing really, because they are, from my experience. And you know, the more I got into that, the more isolated I became, and the more I didn't want to be around people. And, you know, my conversations were limited to the quality of cocaine you had and how much you had, and, you know, and women. And, you know, my world had become very myopic. My view had become very myopic, and my world had become very small. You know, because I was too anxious to be in a social situation to talk to people about, hey, how's your footy going? You know, what about those Blues? Or, you know, I couldn't do that small talk. I couldn't talk to my neighbour. I couldn't talk to the milk bar owner, because I was so, you know, that was, whoa. You know, my neighbour was I was very careful to just keep it on a, how you going kind of basis.
So the more anxious you get, or you got, did that mean the bigger the mask? The
bigger the mask, absolutely.
Right. So then the bigger the fear that you're going to get busted, that really what's behind the mask is not...
Well, you know, you live in constant fear of getting found, and someone tapping you on the shoulder and go, hey, you know, you're actually a scared little bloke. And that's what I lived in fear of, you know. And
is that hence the shuffling of the women through the door?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the women long enough to see it?
Yeah, the women thing was validating my manhood too, you know. It was like, I believed that to be a successful man, you know, like I looked at movies and, you know, and around me, and to be a successful man you had to drink lots, you had to get lots of women, and you had to be a good fighter. And so I ticked the boxes in all those areas and made sure that I was good in those areas, and I was allowed to, you know, to succeed in those areas. But they actually made me feel worse about myself, because I was just feeding in my addiction, you know. I wasn't present. I wasn't having meaningful relationships. It was just notches in the belt, you know, tallying up as many women as I could and trying to impress my mates and trying to be accepted and trying to be looked up to by who? By other men, you know, which was kind of weird, you know. And it was just about validation. I was so insecure that I wanted you guys to think that I was, you know, I was the guy you wanted to be, you know. And on paper, that all looks great, but, you know, it's a very lonely existence, because, you know, to be that lonely guy at the bar, that tough guy who doesn't, you know, who drinks alone, and women are just, you know, that's a very lonely existence, and it's not my authentic self. You know, that's a mask that was the product of a misguided youth, and basically the product of believing all the bullshit that we're fed on a daily basis through all manner of media. You know, that, you know, every TV show, every film, you know, it perpetuates that myth. And I believed it, and I bought it, and I pursued it, and I got it, and it was an empty bubble. It was, in fact, the total opposite of what I anticipated.
It sounds like to me also, when you talked about you know, the better car and the hotter woman and the more money and all of these external things that will what then make you a man. And I feel like why I started the talk tonight with, you know, these notions of masculinity that are everywhere, on billboards, on our TV shows, on our magazines, on our phones, like that you are fed these notions all the time, and then how do you live up to that? Like, how does one keep what you said, the inner sense of, you know, my own compass of my own ethics and what it is? So today, you've got 3 kids, you've got a boy, correct?
I've got 2 boys and a girl.
2 boys and a girl. So what are you trying to instill in them in terms of what it is to be a man, or to encourage them, their man within them?
Well, I'm learning. They're teaching me probably more than I'm teaching them. You know, I want them to be their authentic selves. I want them to be free to express themselves emotionally. I want them to know that they have security of a family that loves them, and to be able to grow and be nurtured in a safe environment where nothing is wrong. You know, they're not wrong, you know. Because I personally had a huge attachment on what was right and what was wrong. And, you know, this was, and it was all fucked up because it was, you know, I'd taken what was acceptable, you know, like alcoholism is acceptable in today's society. You know what I mean? Not only is it acceptable, it's encouraged. If you're going to be a man, so you better be able to drink shitloads, you know, to be an acceptable man. You know, I know that today to be bullshit. You know, I also know that you don't have to be a great womanizer to be a man. You know, I mean, to accept your authentic, to find out first of all who your authentic self is, and then to be comfortable and to accept it. And to stand by those principles, as Mark said, to be unchanged through going through life, which throws a lot of stuff at you and different pressures. And, you know, part of that whole, my addictions and stuff was wanting to fit in, because all those substances and things allowed me to fit in. And, you know, and today, I mean, I have a lot of anxiety and fear for my kids, you know, because I know what I went through. I don't want them to go through it, but they're going to go through it. And I know that, and I accept that. And that the challenge for me as a father is to allow them to go through that without putting my fingerprints all over it and stopping them from living their lives and wrapping them in cotton wool. And, you know, like recently I was faced with the idea of do I, you know, I don't want to put my 5-year-old boy through school, because he's going to get bullied and he's going to, and all this fear about what's going to happen to him in the future. And, you know, that's all bullshit. You know, I mean, things may happen, they probably will, but the fact of the matter is that they happen to all of us.
And also,
you need that to grow.
You said that you were encouraging them to express their feelings.
Yeah.
And the gamut of their feelings.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that? What kind of feelings are you talking about?
Well, you know, it's a tricky one, because I think that masculine men are inherently aggressive in our beings. I think that the aggression is something that we're born with, and it's, again, a very primal thing. I think that the challenge for men these days is to work out how to use that aggression in a positive way and not in a destructive way, and not just for the sake of having an outlet. Like, I know for myself, if I don't spend my physical energy, it turns inwards and I get angry. And I can express that anger in a destructive way, or I can express it through positive ways, like channel it into my work or surfing or something that does me good. And I want to try and instill in my boys that it's okay to be angry, it's okay to want to have that physical outlet, because it's a natural thing, but not to hurt other people, just, you know. And if you do, to take ownership of your actions, you know. I try and instill, for me, the most important thing is to teach them honesty. And I want them to be safe in coming to me regardless of what they've done, with an honest response, and rather than to cover up their tracks in case they might get in trouble for something they've done. I'd rather them, you know, come to me and express it, and I won't be happy, but I won't be happy about what they've done, but I'll be happy that they've been honest. Because, you know, we're taught to lie from a very early age. You know, you don't want to get into trouble. You know, you don't want to get into trouble, so you lie. And then you get caught and you get in trouble for doing the bad thing and you get in trouble for lying. So, you know, but I don't want to, I want to try and be as openly communicative with my children as possible and teach them to communicate what's going on inside them, because I know that it was the inability to communicate what was going on inside me that led me down the path of self-destruction, because I didn't understand how to express myself emotionally. I didn't understand how to express what I needed. And it wasn't cool to talk about that shit. You know, you couldn't go up to your mate at the bar and go, man, I'm feeling really scared. Because he'd just go, fucking man up, loser, you know. And you would, you know. I mean, the favourite one is drink a teaspoon of concrete. What the fuck is that?
But that's also like a belief, and now your belief is completely different, because look at you, you're sitting in front of 200 people.
What do you mean, sorry?
Well, like the whole thing, if you can't go up to your mate and say, I'm feeling really
that's
vulnerable
right.
or
Yeah,
whatever,
no,
your beliefs obviously changed.
Absolutely. I don't buy that anymore. You know, I don't buy that bullshit. You know, I see the men standing out in the rain because they're going to rust, and I see them dying inside because they're too scared to express themselves emotionally. You know, I see their relationships withering, and I see people in miserable relationships because they have got no honest communications. You know, because they'd rather, you know, not say anything than to speak the unspeakable truth. You know,
whether that be a positive or a negative feeling.
It's not about the outcome; it's about the process. You know,
awesome.
The outcome's going to be, you know, you might get that smack on the ass, but man, you're going to be true to yourself, and you're going to go through. You know, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Can I ask a good question? Like, you're in King's Cross, having a pretty good time.
Absolutely. I wouldn't change a thing, by the way. I wouldn't change a thing, and that's the truth.
Curious, was there anyone that kind of did tap you on the shoulder at some point and sort of say, mate, what are you doing? Is there anyone that you could look back on to sort of, was there anyone that kind of did that?
There's only maybe on two, most people went, mate, you're a legend, you know, and that's the thing, is that I was only seeking approval through that behaviour, and I got that in spades. I got approval not only from men, but from women too, who went, he's a bad boy, I like this guy, he's a bad boy. And women are attracted to that, you know. It ended in tears, it always did, you know. But there was only maybe one or two occasions when I remember one Greek chick came up to me, and she was a real straight chick, and she was a friend of a friend, and I wasn't attracted to her, and she just said, when are you going to grow up? And I was like, never. Why would you grow up? Where's the upside to growing up? You know, she said, well, are you going to grow up and have family, have kids? And I was like, forget about that, man. Look at me. You know, I've got women everywhere. I've got whatever. I'm in adults, you know, I live in like, you know, it's adults' wonderland. But I think back to that time, and she touched me, you know, she did, because I was running. I was running as fast as I could from, I didn't want to face responsibility. I didn't want to face my life, and I didn't want to face the wreckage of my past. And that, you know, she probably doesn't know it. I'm sure she doesn't, but she got through to me, you know. Because
Awesome.
somewhere in there was this denial that, you know, there was this longing for me. I longed for a normal life, to have the picket fence and the 3 children. And the amazing thing is today I've got that stuff, you know. And I actually thought it was too late for me, you know, because I had kids at 40, and I thought, you know, I was resigned to a life of running around nightclubs with a bag of coke trying to pick up young girls. And it was sad. I knew a lot of guys in their 60s, you know, who died.
It's never too late.
Who died in hotel rooms, and it's never too late.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Beautiful.
Thank you.
So honest. So thank you so much, Steve.
You're welcome.
Lee, would you like to read us your story?
Sure. I'm not really sure what masculinity is, but I have a lot of ideas about what it should be, none of which I seem to be able to live up to. As a kid, my dad was mostly in his mind, and if you wanted to relate to him, you had to do it through abstract concepts, philosophical jousting, or discussing recent breakthroughs in scientific understanding. I remember feeling a deep melancholy being in the same room as my dad, and yet on different planes of existence. Me playing with my toys, him reading a book, almost motionless, a frown on his face, far, far away in the rarefied heights of his mind. I remember looking at him and waiting for him to notice me watching him. Sometimes I'd say, "Dad," just to see if he'd hear me, and often he'd carry on reading. If he did look up, blinking as if waking from a dream, he'd want to know why I required his attention. What is it, he'd say, meaning, what's the problem? What's the pressing issue? And I'd say, oh, nothing. And I swore to myself that I would be a better dad. I would be with my children when I was with them. I would see them as they are, rather than how I think they are. And yet I find myself doing the same thing with my daughter, suddenly realizing she's been calling my name repeatedly while I was lost in thought, or wanting to be around her and her mother, my wife, and not being able to bear their presence, their spontaneity of expression, their emotional energy, too much for my frail capacity to feel, to be sensitive. And quickly I get overwhelmed, triggered, resentful, and eager to get away. So I understand these days why my dad was so often lost in his books and why he left when he did. It was too much for him. He was overloaded, constantly blowing his internal fuses, unable to cope with the chaos and the energy of his family and of his own feelings. And I wonder now if that's simply an aspect of masculinity, more comfortable in head or body than in heart, more at ease with the orderliness of thought, the simplicity of physical action, than with the ever-changing, often tempestuous world of feeling. I don't know what masculinity is, but I know that when I began to learn the skills of indigenous survival, journeying out into wild nature, spending long periods moving silently, intensely aware, straining my senses to absorb the nuances that signaled the presence or absence of the prey I sought, I felt then, more than I ever have, like a man. And I wonder if it's actually possible to be fully, naturally masculine in our culture. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors fulfilled their masculine roles as providers and protectors outside of the village. Masculinity was only real, only embodied, once the noises of the village were left behind and they found themselves outside of the domestic sphere, crossing the boundary between the human and the more than human environment. To me, in the wildness that lies beyond the village is where the masculine makes sense. And now I look at my father and I see a man struggling to leave the village, struggling through his books to find the edge of the circle of domesticity and to cross that border. And I often see a similar desperation in myself. It's not that I think being a father and a husband and a business owner isn't masculine. It's that for me, it isn't enough. The pressure of trying to exist only within the human-made environment does strange things to me, and like a balloon squeezed, I burst out in weird, unexpected directions with addictive or emotionally violent impulses, or I implode into brooding withdrawal and resent. It wasn't until I started doing rites of passage programs with other men in wild nature that I began to have a realization that so much of what I was told was disagreeable about me as a child, that was disruptive, antisocial, that felt caged, terrified, and unyielding, was simply the part of me that was a boy trying to make do in an environment where my masculinity was unmoored, lost, and even taboo. And I still don't know what masculinity is, but somehow, more and more, I can sense its shape. More and more, I find myself among men in wild nature, and I feel as though I belong.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So one of the things that you spoke about was your, you called it your frail capacity to feel, to be sensitive, and how quickly you can get triggered or overwhelmed. So what do you actually do in these moments?
Good question. Well, I really resonate with what Steve said about needing exercise and physical expression. And I meet lots of other men who say the same things, that they need to be able to express emotions physically, that for us it's not enough just to talk about them. And as a psychotherapist, when I was learning about the difference between genders, I read one study that showed that when women talk about feelings, their emotional arousal goes down, their heart rate decreases, whereas when men talk about feelings, we get more stressed out. And so for me, I need to work it out physically often. Sometimes talking helps, but other times I just have to get out of the house and go for a run. And I need to have some kind of physical adventure every day, is what I've realized about myself. I don't know if that's all men, but it's definitely a need for me. Yeah.
So if you're, for instance, having a conversation with your wife and your child's there and suddenly that trigger happens, what do you literally do?
Oh.
Do you just go, I'm going for a run, see ya? I mean, seriously, is that what you do?
Man, I wish it were that easy. See ya! Well, often what will happen is I'll get a little bit quiet and withdrawn and into myself. My wife is getting good at recognizing when this happens to me. We had this traffic light system where I could say if I was really in my stuff and I just couldn't talk about it and I was just in no place to be in a relationship, I could say red light, and red light just meant unless the house is burning down, please leave me alone. And then there was amber, which was like, I'm kind of feeling a bit scratchy, but if you need to talk, then I can sort of deal with it. And then green light was, it's all okay. Yeah. And there have been periods of our relationship when I've been a lot more in amber or red than green. Yeah.
So with the red light, in case I what? Like, so what are you doing there in putting the red light sign out?
Well, I suppose if I'm feeling like I'm pushed into communicating or connecting, then often I might get rude or kind of judgmental, you know, and usually it's because I'm feeling in a judgmental place about myself. I'm feeling shame that I've got all these emotions going through that I can't just get over it and man up, take a teaspoonful of concrete. And so there's some shame about that. I'm feeling like there's something not quite right. I need to sort my head out somehow, go for a walk. And so I'll often be in quite a pressured, judgmental, tight space. And so the reason I don't want to interact with her is because I'll end up being rude or cranky and injuring our relationship.
Okay, so it's kind of like a preventative from it sparking into something out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lee lives in the bush in Jervis Bay, so in nature. So you obviously do have that ability to go and, you know, have space and be out in the woods and stuff. But when you're dealing with just the practicalities of being a dad and running a business and all of that, as you said, that kind of human stuff that we all have to do, when you get triggered, and you said sometimes those impulses, like a violent impulse or whatever, where for you personally, where does that stem from, do you think? And B, where do you go with that when it's that intense?
I think that the violence, like the emotional violence, I don't tend to be physically violent, although my dad was. The emotional, the violent thing comes from feeling so caged and trapped. You know, it's like, it's so uncomfortable to be in my feelings when I'm in that place where I'm triggered and stuff is up and nothing seems quite right and I'm feeling crap about myself. It's so kind of claustrophobic in there that the violent impulse feels like that kind of backed into an animal kind of thing where, you know, I need to do something just to get the hell away from this place. It's so uncomfortable and so kind of shameful.
So feelings, are you talking about feelings of not feeling good enough? Is that what you said? Or I'm just trying to pinpoint it so I can understand it a bit more.
The usual story that's running in my head is that I don't want to be in the house. It's, you know, what I was saying about the domestic sphere, that the everyday business of doing stuff, of being a dad and doing the washing up and getting everyone fed and stuff like that, that feels like it's not really where my passion is, and it feels hard to do that for any amount of time. I can do it for a little bit, and then after a while it gets to feel like I'm holding my breath and I need to get out of the house. And so that's usually what's going on the surface of it. That's usually the kind of the story that I'm in. It's like, I've been in the house for too long. I don't want this to be my life, and I need to get out and do something that feels like it is edgy, challenging, like it's got adventure. I feel like I just haven't, if I haven't had some kind of adventure, whether it's a good surf or some time out in the bush, following some animal tracks, some intense focus that isn't that kind of the humdrum of daily life, then I start to get a little bit strange, a little bit hinky. Yeah.
This is so great. This is so honest. This helps me understand men more seriously. What I do see is I know that thing of when it gets, like you were talking about how that whole, if you don't physicalize, you tend to, your body implodes it on you. So then it can, and I do relate to that within myself. If I'm not in my body and connecting to my body, I start to get a bit, and then I'm like, what's wrong with me? And that's usually what it's because I'm not relating and connecting. And so you're working with kids, and fathers. So there's a lot around that whole boys and fathers, particularly around rites of passage and men. And do you find that this, you then being a role model of masculinity, is that something that comes up, or do the boys look up to you or project man onto you?
I suppose they do. I think it's easy for them to do that because I'm usually showing them survival skills, which are just cool to all boys. I remember the first time I met my first teacher of survival skills, and he had a knife, and he said, we're going to make some string. And he got up and went over to a stinging nettle bunch, plucked up some stinging nettles, and started making string out of nettles. I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. And I realized this guy's life was about making fire, building shelter, hunting, playing with sharp things and hot things and dangerous things. And I was like, that's for me. And I haven't looked back since. So I think, most of the time I'm on, it's just that the whole deck is stacked in my favor because those kids are saying, wow, those skills are cool. Yeah. And we have a lot of kids coming through our programs who have attention deficit disorder, oppositional defiant behavior, autistic spectrum. They're all the kids that really struggle in schools, and it seems like there's a kind of a spectrum of wildness. There's like some kids can cope a little bit more with sitting down all day and being confined indoors, and other kids are just wild, and they just it just doesn't sit right with them. And I know I was like that, and those kids are the ones that thrive in the bush. It's so sad because those are the ones that would have been the warriors and the hunters and the trackers, and they would have been revered in tribal society, and the tribe would have rejoiced. Fantastic, like this guy, he needs to be out there in it. We have attention deficit disorder kids, and you tell them, okay, today guys, you're allowed to make a spear, and you're allowed to stalk a wallaby, and if you get close enough to that wallaby and kill it, then that would be fantastic. We'll have a feast. They never get anywhere close enough to wallaby to kill it. So we're comfy. We know, it's illegal it would be illegal anyway. Which I think is interesting. It's illegal to hunt primitively in Australia and America so when you think about how for the vast majority of our human history, if you put human history on a clock face, so that all of human history condensed into an hour, we only started farming 5 minutes ago. And we only went industrial 20 seconds ago. So for the whole of the rest of that time, we were hunting primitively, and that's now illegal. It's illegal to do what used to define our masculinity, enable us to express our masculinity. Anyway, they get those spears in their hands, and they go out, and those attention deficit disorder kids are like Jedis, stalking through the bush. It's like attention deficit what? They just weren't interested in what was going on in the classroom. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you so much.
G'day, Wally's my name, and I just want to say thank you guys for your honesty and bravery. It was incredible tonight. But the two of you guys, being in the AFL and the movie industry, you would have met quite a lot of macho kind of guys. But who were the guys that really stood out, with being authentic and were a good shining light to you two?
Well, for me, from the actors that I met, Lawrence Fishburne was an authentic man who, a very nice man, a very gentle man, and a strong man, who in his presence you felt like you were around a man, in that he was comfortable in his own skin. He wasn't a macho wanker. He didn't need to prove himself, and I think a lot of that, interestingly enough, was brought about with his son coming out as a gay man. I think that made him confront a lot of things in himself and look at a lot and become accepting of that. And once he did that, it was like just opened up everything, But Fishburne was a gentleman, and Stacey Keach was another man. I worked with who I got great respect for, who's also been through his trials and tribulations in order to come out the other end and find peace, you know, a modicum of peace anyway.
What about you, Mark?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think I invariably go to leadership kind of characteristics. And sort of the question I asked Steve before in terms of, I always really appreciate those people around me, the guy that sort of, or the person, male or female, that just sort of pulls you up and sort of just, you know, if everyone's out and there's something going wrong, they're the one that just goes, hang on, should we be doing this right now? And I think that's lucky enough to have played footy with a lot of those different people. And, you know, you look at, you know, Michael Long is someone who, you know, just extraordinary on that front. You know, he, from a footy club, he was an amazing leader, someone who was really warm, but one of those guys too is this really wicked sense of humour that you didn't know he was actually hanging shit on you until about 30 seconds later when you walk away and go, yeah, no, you got me. Yeah. But on the same, like if you're in that sort of place where you're feeling down, that sort of stuff, he was the first one to come over and sort of say, mate, you're going okay. But then you look like what he did, you know, on the long walk. You know, he sort of saw the, you know, inequality between Indigenous and sort of white Australia and just thought, I'm going to go and walk to Canberra to go and have a chat to the Prime Minister. You know, and just, I don't think that's right. So I think it's those guys that sort of stand out for me as the ones that sort of put their hand up and say, no, that's not right.
Do any of you have any experiences that you would put in the supernatural? Occasionally we can have experiences that we find difficult to totally explain, and yet are key to our human development. They stop and make us think, or they add something extra to our experience.
If I may answer, I have had two experiences that for me, I call them, well, they were spiritual experiences. I'll just preface this with, I'm not a religious man. Although I was born in Rome, I never stepped into a church until I got married. I didn't even know the Lord's Prayer. In fact, this is where I'm going with this. It was in Miami. I was doing a lot of coke in Miami in the States in the mid-'80s, and I was over there with this model who was working there and getting lots of money, and I was desperately lonely and living in a nightclub. And I was at this Cuban eatery, and it was just a simple place, the kitchen in the middle and banquette seats around the kitchen. And I was there eating my black beans and beef as I did with rice every day. And this Californian hippie dude walks in next to me and he says, hey, brother, you know, I go, yeah, yeah. He goes, hey, how you doing? I said, oh, man, just leave me alone, you know. He said, do you mind doing me a favour, man? And I go, oh, look, man, I've got no money. I'm just, you know, I'm good, thank you. He said, no, I don't want anything from you, man. All I want you to do is, will you say a prayer with me, man? And I said, a what? He said, will you say a prayer with me, brother? I said, dude, I'm not your brother, and I don't know any prayers. So take a hike, you know. And he said, just do a prayer. And I said, look, man, I don't know. I wouldn't know where to start. And he goes, well, you can repeat after me. I said, there's no fucking way in the world I'm going to do a prayer in this restaurant. He said, no one has to know. I said, what do you mean no? He said, just you and me. He goes, I'll just whisper it. And I go, I'm not going to. He said, all you have to do is just bow your head like this. Just bow your head like that. No one's going to fucking know. So I'm in this Cuban thing, and he goes, you know, he starts doing the Lord Prayer, which I repeated word for word after him. He left, and I thought nothing more about it. Walking home back to the hotel, I had this bizarre experience that I felt like, I don't know, something happened. I felt like I'd just been hit in the face by this beam of light, and everything was really bright. And now I sound like a weird Jehovah's Witness kind of dude. I get that. And I still didn't rush off to church. But I did go back to my girlfriend at the time and go, man, I've just had this experience. We've got it all wrong. You know, I'm telling you that God is the answer and stuff. And she just looked at me like, you're fucked. You know, you are insane. You know, which I was. And although the experience was authentic, I didn't have any faith or a previous experience to build or understand what had happened to me. So, and it was very easy for her to shoot it down and for me to go off. So, no, I'm just tripping, sorry. You know, like she just shut me down and said, you're crazy, you're insane, you better, you know, and wake up to yourself. And I said, you're right, I'm over it, let's move on. You know, but that was an authentic experience, you know, that I had. And another time in my life when I was struggling with some acceptance about certain things, and I was unsure whether I was on the right path. I was out in the surf, and and this sounds like, again, something out of a self-help bloody, you know, soundtrack or movie or something. But these 4 dolphins came out of the water, and I was paddling out to this wave at Gunnamatta, and the wave was about 15 feet in front of me, and these 4 dolphins literally came out of the wave, 2 of them straight for me, and like jet pilots in formation, just went like that. Like they were straight, they missed me by, you know, inches. And I know it was true, like I wasn't tripping and it wasn't an LSD flashback or anything like that, because the guys behind me were just like, whoa, I can't believe that just happened. And I was high for about 2 days, you know. And that, for me, was a sign that I was on the right track.
Lee?
Well, I know that during my year in the bush that Kimber mentioned, there was a point where I went from feeling like I was a visitor on the landscape to the point where I knew the landscape well enough. I knew the trees and the plants, and I even knew what the herds of animals were doing at any one time. And I just started to feel like I belonged. And around that time, I started to have more and more the experience where I'd be moving through the bush, just turn my head kind of randomly as I thought, and I'd see a deer watching me, or I'd just turn up and just in time to see an eagle coming through. Or I'd realise I needed to find a certain specific stick to make fire, and I'd just wander off in the right direction and kind of know where I was going to find it, and sure enough it would be there. And I'd just have those experiences more and more. And in the indigenous cultures that I've been lucky enough to learn from, those kinds of things are just normal, just taken for granted. And yeah,
is this
those are
like
my
Apache
experiences.
cultures?
In Native American, Australian Aboriginal, yeah, any indigenous culture that where your success depends on dealing with something as rich and mysterious as nature, where there's so many different variables, that it's not really something you can do with your logical mind. It has to be kind of a body feeling. And whether you think that's just because the body's more sophisticated at processing a whole bunch of information, or whether your philosophy is different to that, I don't think it matters.
Do you call that like a sixth sense or a spiritual awareness, or what do you call it?
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, intuition. Yeah. But I just know it worked for me, and I've spoke to people whose lives have depended on their awareness, like soldiers or special forces people, and they all say that thing of being stared at, that the feeling that someone's watching you is absolutely real. It's saved their lives hundreds of times. People have written books about that feeling. So I don't know what the mechanism is. I just know that it's real, and I've experienced it as well.
So I'm really interested about your ideas of how we get masculinity to survive within the village, because we do have to man up, as Steve commented. We do,
sure.
As men, we have to learn how to adapt in the new society we find ourselves, and how to make ourselves, well, a meaningful contribution, but also to survive within that village.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think that's the question, maybe for me as a man, and maybe all of us. I don't know. I think that although most of us live in cities at the moment, I think that the benefit and the power of going out in the bush, for me, is just immeasurable. And it's sort of usually after about 24 hours of being back in the bush, it's like, oh, okay, here I am. This is who I am, really. And sanity comes in, sobriety. Thank Christ for this. And so I think for me, the secret is getting out in the bush regularly. And that extended period that I spent in the bush really gave me a new experience of what it was to be a human being and to be a human male. So I would, if that's something that calls to you, then I would recommend that wholeheartedly, as long as you're doing that in a safe way, you know, in a way that's not going to be destructive to yourself, in a way that's supported, where you have the right skills and support that you need to do that. That worked for me. And then when I came back out of the bush, I was rooted as far as being a normal member of society. I just knew that wasn't going to be for me. I'd never be able to hold down a job where I had to sit down most of the day. And because I had that knowledge, that certainty, and because I'd had these profound experiences that had just rocked me, I knew I just needed to make whatever choices, whatever sacrifices and commitments necessary to make that my life about that as much as possible. So we live out in the bush now. We live on a bush property, near enough to Sydney that we can have people coming to our programs. And often I just can't. The other night I just couldn't sleep in the house. I had to slept a couple of nights out of the house. It was so beautiful outside. It was like still, and it was just, sugar gliders were cool. And I was like, I'm not going to sleep indoors. This is absurd. And so that in a way, yeah, we have to make our contributions, and yeah, we have to find a way to be in community and in relationship. And that's what brought me back out of the bush. I wanted to be around people. I wanted to relate to other people and feel like I was part of a bigger village. I wanted to come back to the village. But now I feel like I live on the edge of the village, and I'm lucky enough to have been able to carve out a niche where I'm about helping people move back and forth across the boundary of that village, and that's what it took for me. Thanks.
Do you think that we are in fact causing a great problem, and I refer to a fellow called David Blankenhorn in the United States, who does a lot of work in this area, who made this very famous quote, and he says, "Fatherlessness is the most serious demographic of our time." Do you agree with that?
Look, just from our experience with the work that we do with the young men that we work with, we use mentoring. When AFL players donate, the past and present, donate their time and that sort of thing to become mentors for these young men, and there's likewise elite female athletes get engaged with the young women in the program. And that role modelling, role modelling in itself is a really, it's a strange topic within the AFL, particularly because you get these guys who, as soon as you get drafted, you're kind of a role model. And it doesn't sit well with a lot of guys. It sits well okay with everyone, and some just don't care. But with the young men in the program, the mentoring is really key around that, because it's not so much about, it can't be about this is how you should live your life, but it's just actually just demonstrating, well, that's how you actually treat a waiter or a waitress when you're ordering your coffee. Just those little daily acts of just being a normal person and just, I guess, showing away an example of how things can be. It's just incredibly important. I don't think that's necessarily for the young men in our program who have had mixed experiences of male role models. I think it's just for young men growing up. It's just enormously important. And within a football environment, you are absolutely blessed by that in terms of you go through under-18s and you're sort of surrounded by your peers. But for the, it's sort of interesting, Steve, talking about weddings. Like, it's just as crazy within a football environment, because you literally go to weddings from the time that you're 18 through to you're 40, because you're surrounded by guys going through different stages of their lives. Like, you're 18, you're not just playing against guys who are mature and older and that sort of thing. In Justin Fletcher's case, ancient. But but you're surrounded by men that are at different times in your life, in their lives. So whether it's just got married, just having kids and those sort of things. So you're actually exposed to that all of the time, and it's a really unique environment in that way. Just as well, just by the same token, when you're 30, 32 in a footy environment, you've actually got guys that are 18 that you're expected then to help out. So footy clubs are just a fantastic way to do that. And one thing reflecting on my life, that I've just been blessed to have that through the whole way. So using those, I guess, the lessons that we've learnt through football and those sort of things, and extending those out to the young men that we work with, it's working fantastically well. And it's not a, it's amazing the mentoring relationships that form with young women. It's with the women generally is a massive generalisation, but it's they'll go out and have a coffee and have a chat. Whereas the guys will go for a run, we'll go for a drive, we'll go to the movies, and the conversations might happen. But what you find is generally the men are actually facing the same way, not looking at each other. And those conversations tend to flow. So it's really interesting to see how that's unfolded in our work.
I think that, yes, it is a big question, a big problem. And in the 70s, Mattel released a series of toys called the Hart Family. And they were Ken, Barbie, and 3 kids, and a combi van, right? Now, they did a lot of testing on this Hart Family, and 90% of the kids played with Barbie and the kids and put Dad in the corner. And when they were asked, why isn't Dad there? They said, oh, he's at work. So kids didn't know where to put dad in the playing of the family hearts. So they were never released. It's a bit of trivia.
I'll just quickly go to Lee, and then we'll just have to wrap up. So you're a father of a young 2.5-year-old, and you spend a lot of time with her when your partner's away working. So for you, what would be the answer to this kind of question around fatherlessness?
Look, I mean, I really take my hat off to guys who go out every day and do what it takes to make life work, you know, to put food on the table and keep the roof over their heads. I'm lucky enough where with my work I go away for periods of time, a week at a time or a weekend at a time, and then I come back and I might be a week back in the house. So for me, it's easy in a way. It's almost like I get to do the thing where I leave the village, I go out to do my business out in the bush, and then come back again refreshed and recharged and kind of hungry to see my ladies. But even that I find difficult. You know, after like a few days of that, I'm like, okay, I need to get back out again. So I don't know what the answer is. Like I say, I wonder if it is possible for us to be healthily balanced men in this kind of environment. I really feel like, in one sense, we're like fish who've learned to make do living out of water. And sometimes we can't work out why our scales are always so dry and our fins ache from where we walk on them. And maybe part of it is just enough for us to recognize that this is utterly unnatural for us, that nothing in our genes, nothing in our 300,000 years of evolution has prepared us to work 9 to 5 in a job that isn't directly meaningful, doesn't have adventure, doesn't require an expanded and sensitive awareness of a natural environment with its ebbs and flows and rhythms and its mysteries and beauty. Maybe it's enough for us, first of all, just to say, okay, yeah, actually that's enough to explain why I'm feeling crap today, and I don't want to get out, and I'm finding it really difficult to be in relationship right now. Yeah.
So what I'm getting is there's one kind of common theme which is coming out, which is community and expressing, like encouraging expression and having a sense of community. So the village, the mentoring program, the community of the AFL, that kind of thing, where people are coming together and there's a sense of we're not alone. I
absolutely agree, Kim. But I think it is possible for us to fulfill certain of our emotional needs in an urban environment. The mentoring programs that you're building sound fantastic, and building communities and the healing work that it sounds like you've been doing, Steve, is fantastic. It's no doubt we can do that in an urban environment, but we have to recognise that we are living in a culture that's damaged and distorted, and to a certain extent we're engaged in a process of cultural repair at the moment. As long as we know that, and we know that there's certain things that need to happen, then we won't be surprised, that we won't be taken off guard when we suddenly realise our lives are incredibly difficult, and that we need to do some work, make some changes in order to get our emotional needs met. And
cut ourselves some slack when we feel like, oh, we're failing or we're not doing so well.
Exactly,
cool.
Yeah.
My name's Michael. I also work with, I actually work with families. I was really impressed with your approach, Lee. One of the things that always comes up for me is I think our society sets the goals too high in terms of being a man, and it almost, being a man means being a winner. The way it's presented through media, which is a huge thing. The way you're talking about it is very holistic, and I wonder how can we make changes to put that kind of thinking through society so that everybody's a winner. Women can teach men about how to be masculine just as well as men can teach each other.
I just think we're learning. I think that's the question. You know, like other people have asked like echoes of that question. The question is how can we make it work at the moment? I think we're all learning, and we're all doing the best that we can. And I suppose my real strong feeling is that we need to be able to recognise what we are engaged in at the moment, the scale of what we're engaged in, and so then allow ourselves to take small steps to do the work as much as we can in our personal lives, and to feel good about that, because this isn't a change that's going to take place in one person's life or from the heroic efforts of one person. This is like, you know, the way that when you look at a newspaper picture, it's made up of all of those tiny little dots that make up the full picture, and we're all dots in that picture right now. And I think we all need to feel kind of, like Kim said, cut ourselves some slack and feel good about ourselves for the changes that we are able to make, the personal healing that we're able to do in our lives, the programs or connections in our community that we can build. They all add up, and I see a big thing that's happening, and it can't help but happen because it has to happen. There's so much need for it, and I think it is happening. So we're finding out what that's going to look like right now.
Great. Thank you. Please put your hands together. These amazing men.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark Bolton, Steve Bastoni and Lee True. Beautiful honesty. Thank you. It's so inspiring, and many times I felt like this overwhelming feeling of this is why we do this. This is why we run these forums, because of this kind of honesty and what that can show to people and role model to people that it's okay to speak your truth. You know, it's okay not to know all the answers, and that we are doing our best. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming along tonight. Please stay and join us for a cup of tea, chat to the men, chat to each other, and feel the community. Thanks.
Thank you.